Good evening and welcome to Lawyers on the Line. I'm Bob Falsani, founding partner of the law firm of Falsani, Balmer, Peterson, Quinn, and Beyer, and this evening's moderator. We see tragedies involving violence in the news every day. It seems everyone has an opinion on gun rights and the right to bear arms. How does the law treat gun owners and users when violence results? I'm pleased to welcome our panelists who will take your questions about tonight's topic. Mark Rubin is the St. Louis County Attorney. Ross Littman is the St. Louis County Sheriff. And Lowell Rudd is a Senior Instructor at Bear Butte Enterprises, specializing in personal protection and firearms safety instruction. So Mark, Ross, and Lowell will respond to your questions about gun violence and the Second Amendment. And please call, and I'm sure we're going to get a lot of calls. I even got some emails this week already, just to start with. The number is 218-788-2844. And if that's long distance, you can call on the toll-free line, which is 1-877-307-8764. Let's start out a little bit and just try and talk generally about the amount of gun violence in the United States. Can anybody take that on?
Well, actually, we've got two components, I think. We've got gun violence, but then we have violence. I think generally violence is running pretty high, but gun violence is dropping to an appreciable amount, and a lot of the violent crimes are decreasing throughout the last decade. I think we were talking about that earlier, Ross.
Yeah, I was kind of sharing with the group before we started tonight's show that there was a recent study that came out from the Department of Justice that has been tracking gun violence, gun crimes dating back to 1993. And I guess what was interesting to me is that when you look at gun homicides in that period from 93 through 2011, and also non-fatal gun crimes, down dramatically during that time period, 39% on the homicides and over 60% on non-fatal gun crimes. But still we have a high level of public awareness and perception that we still have a lot of gun crime. And what can we do about it to even make those numbers lower? And that's where all the controversy is these days.
I was just looking at statistics in Japan and Canada, and we think Canada was probably a lot like the United States, but their gun violence is substantially less than our country, and in Japan, way less, of course. Yeah. And the amount of guns in Japan is way less. Canada's not too much less, but it's quite a bit less as a percentage.
Well, to reply to that, though, we have to understand that during the period of time that this gun violence has been decreasing, we've added several millions of firearms to the number of people have in this country. And also, I don't know if we want to look at Japan. I believe Japan still utilizes torture to get confessions, and I don't know if we want to have that kind of a justice system. But as I look at it, comparing the United States to other countries is difficult. We have such a wide demographics in this country, different conditions, urban, rural, ethnic groups, social histories, things that there's so many variables that I don't know if you can compare one location to another and come up with any meaningful data.
Okay, well, we're going to solve a lot of the world's problems here tonight. So, I know that Mr. Rubin is going to be a U.S. Attorney General after we finish.
Yeah, right.
What were your thoughts on that?
Well, actually, I was just talking with Chief Ramsey this afternoon, and I told him I was going to be on the program tonight, and he said, "You wouldn't believe it. Last night in Duluth, 7 gun calls. 7. That's amazing. When you talk about the numbers are going down, violent crime across the country, but just in our small city, that's alarming."
How many guns are out there in the United States right now in terms of in the population?
We're looking at probably one gun for every man, woman, and child in the country.
Okay, so that's
About 3.5 million guns total. It's difficult to look at it because there's a lot of guns that are not reported. You know, guns that have been around
Like
for
300
200 years
million.
and nobody knows about them.
you mean 300 million guns?
300 million guns, yes.
Yeah. So what does that tell us about gun control efforts? Any thoughts on that, Mark?
Well, we've seen a spike in gun ownership, a spike in the number of permits that are issued. The more people have a fear that their gun rights are going to be limited, it seems there's a correlation between increased gun ownership in anticipation of the government doing something nasty to take the guns away.
Interesting. Have you two in law enforcement run into gun theft? Is that an issue? In other words, if somebody's got a nice a set of armaments at their lake cabin, and pretty soon they don't.
The common burglary but back in the days when I was a patrol deputy, and even now, the deputies that work with me, commonly we respond to a burglary. Inevitably, one of the most common items taken in a home burglary are the firearms. And if I can just send one message to everybody, please store them safely. We talk about trying to prevent and lower gun crime and gun deaths, but proper storage. But even particularly for this purpose, if you keep them stored and secured so that they're not accessible to kids, readily accessible to kids and to burglars, and please record the serial numbers. It's just so much easier for us to track them, to solve the crime, the crime of burglary. But that's really one of the big things that we deal with a lot is gun thefts.
So you're involved in the permitting process, right?
I am.
Okay. You have a lot of
Directly, yeah.
criminals show up that are about to commit a crime, ask for a permit then?
No, but we do get the occasional application. And just so the viewers know, the sheriff is directly responsible for all the permits to carry that are issued within the county. Chiefs of police have the responsibility and are tasked with handling the permits to acquire. When an individual wants to purchase a handgun or a military-style semi-automatic weapon, they can get that permit to purchase or transfer through the chiefs of police. But we're directly responsible for all the permits to carry.
So there are kinds of guns that don't need permits to be purchased?
That's correct.
What doesn't need a permit for purchasing?
Like typically a shotgun or a rifle.
Hunting rifle?
Yeah. Right.
So a high-powered hunting rifle, no
Right.
permit?
Right.
Okay.
The two things that fall in that, number one is we wrote the law specifically to task the county sheriff with being the agent, the approving agent, because number one, he is the preeminent law enforcement official in his county, federal, state, etc. He is the primary law enforcement official.
Ross likes preeminent. That's his favorite.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
And directly accountable to the people that live in the county.
And exactly, that's the other side of it. And I will say that I've been very pleased with response that Ross given us. I've looked at the denials that he's produced. I have no problems with any of them. So I think that that part of the process is working quite well.
Okay, somebody asked, our first question from the audience is the origin of the Second Amendment. So the constitutional scholars on our panel here, Mark, would you like to try that? Or?
The origin of the Second Amendment, well, there's number one, the group of southern states wanted to make sure they could keep their state militias. So this was a compromise amendment to make sure that's why the word militia is in there, and to make sure that citizens could be armed, could keep their firearms in the event they needed to have a further revolution. They didn't trust the government.
And wasn't there a question of whether the way that Second Amendment was written, whether it really provided the right to bear firearms, in other words, whether you had a right to your arms, an absolute right under the Constitution, and the Supreme Court finally grappled that fully a few years ago?
And they finally, yes, you do, but yeah, that was a major issue. Was it just for a well-regulated militia, or was it for the average citizen to still maintain the firearms and possess them as they saw fit? And it's subject to certain regulations that have to be reasonable and are constitutionally permissible.
And does that mean that you have an absolute right to bear any kind of a firearm? You can have grenades and machine guns and anything you want under that amendment?
No, the Supreme Court and by legislation, Congress and state legislatures have said there are certain firearms that we've deemed to be that you can't possess under the Second Amendment. Perfect example is a fully automatic machine gun. Legislation was in the 30s, I think, when that was
Right.
passed. Yeah, and that's an example of legislation that actually was effective. It said no more fully automatic machine guns.
You do have the right to possess a fully automatic firearm. However, it requires a Class 3 license. It requires special permitting, and it has to be registered in a certain manner. The difficulty that we find, we're talking about, it takes no requirement for any paperwork for me to buy a Remington Model 7400 semi-automatic 30-06 deer rifle. Now, when I match that firearm up against a AR-15, which is a 223, which is a small little shell, it's a 22 caliber round, matched against a 30-06, which is about twice the size and has about 2.5 times the knockdown power. I don't understand why we are looking at one and saying that there's something wrong with it. The only thing I can say is that, and I've actually heard this from people, it looks scary. Well, is this a reason for taking that particular firearm and making it into something that it's not? Number one, it's so underpowered that only in the last 2 years has it been allowed as a deer rifle in the state of Minnesota, because it was too underpowered to meet the Minnesota specifications. It is now becoming one of the most popular platforms. It's a fantastic varmint gun. It's actually a really nice gun for deer hunting. I know a lot of people use them because it's got a collapsible stock. You can put a collapsible stock on it, and it works great for moving around in your deer blind. It's easy to carry. It's easy to point. It gives you follow-up shots. So many things that it can be utilized for.
Do you have stock in that company then? Or?
No, I don't.
No, okay. No, but here's my real question as far as what you're talking about. That's still legal, isn't it?
At this point in time, it is legal,
Yeah.
but it is the firearm to demonize of choice at this point in time. And can I just ask a quick question of the people on the
Sure.
panel here?
Yeah.
Mark, can you tell? You've heard of the AR-15, correct?
Mm-hmm.
Can you tell me what the AR and AR-15 stands for?
I can't pronounce it. It's Russian, wasn't it?
No. How about you, Russ?
No.
Okay. This is. How about do you have that information?
No, but you were cluing me in this week.
Okay,
Yeah.
I appreciate your honesty.
Yeah.
No, I ask this question throughout the country, and I come up with the same response normally. It's called assault rifle. This is what people say it is. However, it's not. It is not an assault rifle by definition. The AR stands for Armalite, which is a company that built this in the first place. It was a semi-automatic firearm. The only time it was ever purchased by the military, some of them were purchased by my old boss, General LeMay, for use for guarding his SAC bases. And other than that, Armalite sold it to Colt, who made it into the M16, which is a military firearm. So this has never been an actual military firearm.
Okay, let me move along here,
Please.
okay? How about, somebody asked, what's your thoughts about arming people in schools, having guns in schools? So my wife used to be a teacher, so and she was in the NRA at one time in her life, so she'd be all ready to take people on if she needed to. What do you think of that?
Personal opinion, I'm hesitant the fact of having our teachers armed in school. If you're going to have armed people in the school, you should have armed law enforcement officers. And we're just not prepared to afford that, and we're not going to do that as a society, I'm sure. So no, I'd be very uncomfortable with armed teachers in schools.
What do you think, Ross?
Yeah, we've, asked the educators and the school administrators and the parents of the children how they feel about it. At least my feeling is, and Mark's absolutely right, we've tried our best to allocate resources and work with the school districts and maybe put a law enforcement officer in a school. We've been able to do that with some success, but the problem is the funding for the, and you can imagine with what we call the shift relief factor, if you want to have at least one officer in every school every day and all the time, and how are we going to pay for that? I'm not comfortable with teachers or volunteers filling that role. I mean, I'd rather they concentrate their efforts on the job at hand and being educators. But,
Lowell, you're ready to train them, I'm sure.
Well, actually, there's an organization that will train teachers for free. One of the major academies will do this, but I actually agree in part with the outfit of having teachers carrying firearms in school. Now, I see an outfit where certain individuals who are properly trained have access to locked boxes have a locked box at every desk. No one knows which teachers are trained. No one knows which boxes have guns in them. In that case, when an incident were to take place, then those specific trained people would have access to those firearms. Actually, a number of schools are doing this throughout the country in all different ways.
Okay. Let's move on to another question here. So here's a good one, and we were going to cover this anyway if we could. If someone enters your property in the middle of the night and you shoot them in self-defense, what Minnesota laws pertain to this, and what will happen to you?
Well, Lowell, you teach this, and I know as part of your permitting. And what do you tell the people? I mean, you got your standard line.
Self-defense has to have certain components, and the primary one is: would a reasonable person in the same circumstances be in fear of their life or grievous bodily harm? If you do not meet that standard, you cannot utilize deadly force against another individual. In your own home, you can utilize commensurate force, sufficient force to stop a felony or to eject someone from your home, or actually I should say keep someone from entering your home, or to hold them until law enforcement arrives. But you cannot utilize deadly force until you meet that one primary standard.
Okay, so
that's the key language.
Yeah.
Was it reasonably necessary under the circumstances? And that's a very large hurdle. And there used to be a question in the law, in ordinary self-defense, if you're outside of your home and someone threatens you with a firearm, you have first a duty to retreat if you're able to retreat. And then you can take what measures you feel are reasonably necessary. And there used to be some confusion under the law where in your home, did you also have a duty to retreat? And that was clarified by our Minnesota Supreme Court that said, no, you do not have a duty to retreat in your home, but the action you take must be reasonably necessary.
So is this the Castle Doctrine then?
Yes.
Okay.
That failed not this past legislative session, but the one before. And I'm sure Mark would tell you that the law, the way it is worded now, is adequate to cover somebody that meets that reasonable standard. And in terms of prosecution or self-defense, there have been no problems that I'm aware of.
Well, the Castle Doctrine would have made a presumption that you were acting reasonably under those circumstances just because you were in your home.
Right.
And that's a great change.
It has, of course, home now becomes a question. Does this mean, it has been determined to mean a motel room or a hotel room that you're in custodial care of, right, or your business. One component of the Castle Doctrine that we find should be necessary is you have that same right on the street if you are where you have the legal right to be. In other words, if you're driving in your car, and at this point in time, if someone attempts to access your car under the current law, you have a requirement to retreat.
Yes.
But is that reasonable?
And Florida just passed this law that you don't have to repeat anymore.
You don't have to retreat on
Did
the
I say-
street, that's
yeah,
correct.
Retreat, retreat. And of course, it's the public defender's dream law down there. I mean, they love it because there's all kinds of street violence, and they're always saying, well, I couldn't retreat, and I felt like I was in danger, and so therefore, this is my new defense that just got thrown in my lap here. So it's kind of interesting how when you pass, sometimes what you wish for isn't the greatest thing,
But the other side of that, though, is the fact that we have to understand that a individual who has a civilian who is required to, by the fact they're being attacked, to defend themselves because of the way the laws are written and the way they're utilized, that he will probably expend a good amount of whatever goods he has, his house, his cars, his etc., in order to defend himself from a charge.
Let me try and cover a little bit of ground here quickly. If you use a gun in a crime, is there a mandatory sentence?
Yes, there is. It's a 5-year mandatory minimum sentence.
And is that plea bargain some or a lot or not?
Some places it is. In our office, we don't. In fact, I wrote the gun policy years ago. The extent of our agreement is you want to plead straight up to the charge. If a judge wants to give you a break, take it all into consideration. Sometimes we'll go along with that, but we don't plea bargain those cases. And what's also important, and Sheriff Libman was talking about the burglaries, the home burglaries. If a person goes in to do a burglary with a firearm, yes, you're facing a mandatory minimum. You steal a firearm, you are using that firearm in the commission of that burglary, we can charge you with the mandatory minimum. And in some cases we have. So people need to understand, it's not just going in, it's what you steal once you're in there.
Now, once you've got certain kinds of crimes on your record, can you possess a firearm, Ross?
No. There's quite a list of crimes under both state law and federal law that are prohibitors from possessing firearms. And in some cases, it's a lifetime prohibition, like the misdemeanor crime of domestic violence is a lifetime prohibitor. And the only way to get your rights restored is by the court, by a judge, and appealing. And it's called a restoration hearing. Yeah. It's a lot of the crimes that are prohibitors are very, very typical, and your really serious felony crimes, of course, murder, arson, rape. Interestingly enough, one that would maybe fly under people's radar screens is theft of a motor vehicle. If you're convicted of felony theft for a motor vehicle, that's a prohibitor. It's determined to be a crime of violence. And
So you're 17 years old and you're
Yeah.
having your wild night and you steal a car and they certify you as an adult.
we speculate that
That's it, right?
some legislator got his or her vehicle stolen and fixed that. So.
Well, we have, and that actually does happen. You have an 18 and 19-year-old brothers who get in a fight, and somebody calls law enforcement, and all of a sudden it becomes a domestic, and now these two people spend the rest of their life with this over their head. I had
Can
asked.
they deer hunt with a bow then, though? Can you
They
do
can.
that? Yeah.
They cannot
Not
buy
a
a
crossbow.
Not a
Yeah.
regular bowl.
regular bow. They can't buy a firearms license.
So let's say you're convicted of a gun charge, okay? So it's illegal to possess a gun. Can you keep your ammunition or keep your guns at all? Or do you have to give them up somewhere?
Federal law prohibits the convicted felon from possessing ammunition. Minnesota still does not have a prohibition. That was one of the pieces of legislation. In fact, the Minnesota County Attorneys Association, we are recommending that as part of the legislation packet this last year to at least prohibit the possession of ammunition. Because if you got ammo, presumably you have a gun. So.
Interesting. So, final question, I guess, is this. Do restrictions on gun sales, straw sales, sales at gun shows, private sales, with the number of guns out there in our world right now, is there any hope that they would change anything, that would modify anything in terms of gun violence?
I don't think so. As a matter of fact, the individuals who are pushing these laws I've heard both our president and our vice president make the statement, none of these guns, or none of these laws that we're looking at would have had any effect on the events we're trying to stop. And yet we're going to pass these laws anyway, which are going to be very, very, very onerous on honest firearms owners, going to cost tremendous amounts of money. And my question is, why are we doing it then if it's not going to do any good? It's the government studies, the GAO studies, have determined that the so-called assault weapons ban, and I hate that name because it's not an assault weapon, but nevertheless, had absolutely no effect on the amount of crime that was committed. There was a study by
I've got one
Okay.
follow-up here, okay?
Please.
And that's this. What about the question of people with mental illness problems? I mean, is there, you know, the person that goes in and shoots 25 third graders, you know, usually isn't very well balanced. They're not that angry because they got a bad grade in 4th grade. And so is there anything to do with this tracking mental illness and gun ownership or sales to or usage?
I think the last legislative session, I haven't seen the law yet, but I read a summary. They did increase the record keeping for people who have been committed for mental treatment, mental health treatment. Because that's important that we know that there's a database that we can check that. The sheriff can check that when he's issuing the permit. Is there something on record to show that a person did undergo mental health treatment?
How do you feel about that, Lowell?
Actually, and I'm going to throw in a plug here, the National Rifle Association actually helped to write the first federal law that actually put committed individuals who are committed for mental problems. See, but the problem that we had writing this thing was, how do you draw the line between writing a law that picks up the people who are a danger, those people who are from the people who are not, and how do you do it in such a manner that it does not stop people who need mental assistance from going for getting counseling?
Not everybody that's had Celexa for 6 months has to be banned from ever using a weapon or owning one.
Exactly, and one of the primary outfits is our veterans returning from combat zone.
Right. I've got to wind this up right now. I want to thank you, folks. You've been fabulous. That's all we have for tonight. I wanted to let you know that you can have your questions on tonight's topic or any legal topic answered every Wednesday at noon at the St. Louis County Courthouse through the volunteer attorney programs Ask an Attorney service, 723-4005. For this particular topic, they'd probably know something about the legal matrix, but they might not know some of the details about violent crime. But for other legal problems, you can talk to them and get 10 or 20 minutes of their time, and that's a tremendous opportunity. And they also help you to get to the right path to legal help, and it's a free public service, which is pretty terrific. Remember, you can watch tonight's program again on WDSE.org or at the Falsani, Bomber, Peterson, Quinn, and Beyer website. Please join us again next week when we answer your questions about capital punishment. We'll have a very interesting panel on that. And again, I want to thank our panelists. Great job tonight. I'm Bob Falsani, and good night.